Colin in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Colin, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, great show.
Thank you.
So I've been having more and more encounters with a group. I was at the impeachment rally in L.A. last night, and I've heard you mention on the air the Bob Avakian cult.
Yeah.
And I've noticed this group, people actually call into your show and mention their tagline, Refuse Fascism, Trump Pence must go. But I did some research and found it was, it's basically Bob's cult. So I wanted...
Yeah, they call it used to be called the Revolutionary Communist Party, but they've operated under a whole bunch of other names as well.
Okay. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about your concerns.
Well, that's about all I know about them. Back in late 2002, early 2003, before the war in Iraq had started, but when Trump or when Bush and Cheney were leading up to it, I was traveling around the country speaking on that issue. And one of these groups invited me to speak at a rally that they had put together at a large church in New York City. And I showed up and along with a couple of other progressives. And, we gave our speeches, and we were the draw names, right? We were the ones who this church was so full that, the upper, what do you call it, the balcony was filled with people. The church was filled. There's probably, a couple thousand people in that church, and standing room only. And when we left, there were three of us who gave speeches. And I think Mark Crispin Miller was one of them as well. In fact, I'm quite sure it was he and me, and I don't recall the third person. And, when we left, the Avakian cult people got up and just basically, started pitching their stuff. And they were going through the crowd taking names and addresses and stuff, email addresses and whatnot. And that was when we realized that there was something going on here that had nothing to do with stopping the war. It had to do with building a political movement. And as I looked into it, I found that they were, at that time, they were operating under the name World Can't Wait, and which is like the world can't wait to end the war or stop the war or whatever. And or at least this little cell of them were operating on that name. So beyond that, I don't know a lot about them. You could Google, as I did, the group and what they're up to. But they have a long history of basically infiltrating and damaging progressive movements. My understanding, and I don't have firsthand information on this, but I've heard this from callers, and I've heard it from I've heard it from a friend of mine who lives in New York, is that their infiltration of several of the New York Occupy groups, remember Occupy Wall Street? That they basically got into and took over a bunch of those groups, and that led to the Occupy movement in New York just disintegrating.
Wow. So, well, that's funny because they were using that Occupy technique last night to try and shut down the impeachment rally. The technique where you don't really have one speaker, but everyone echoes the speaker.
Right. Right.
And, so it's really weird how they're disrupting genuine progress. And, they have these great talking points. They have tons of flyers and literature. So you see everyone spreading their slogan because they don't know, what it really means.
Right.
And it's bizarre. You try and engage them with anything positive, and they will shut you down. They hate the Democrats. So beware when you hear people calling in with this refuse fascism trope, because, I don't know what they're trying to accomplish other than just.
Well, they're it's sort of like the Moonies. They're raising money. They're building their cult. It's I don't know how to say it beyond that, and it's unfortunate that they're doing it on our side. There's another one that's more over on the right, and the guy's got an unusual name, and in fact, I'm not even sure he's still alive, but there's still a cult around him. And they tend to infiltrate libertarian and Republican movements, and it's making me crazy that, that his name has escaped me. But I haven't thought about it for years.
Sorry, but it sounds like your experiences in the SDS, or even some of mine with Antifa, there's some great work being done, but there's always one or two people around who's just edging for,
Well, with SDS, we were, the major problem we had was infiltration by the local police, in East Lansing anyway. The state police and the East Lansing City Police had infiltrated SDS, and the state police guy who was inside SDS was the guy who was most frequently calling for violence. That was not good.